I'm Natalie. I'm 32, I live just outside Chicago, and last Sunday I walked into my parents' dining room knowing I was about to end a lifetime of being the capable one who quietly absorbs everyone else's bad decisions. My brother Jake took the head seat like he owned the place, raised a champagne flute and announced to the table, as if it were already decided, that he'd be moving into my house next weekend, until he gets back on his feet. My mother clasped her hands like a proud pageant coach. My dad nodded solemnly, already rehearsing a speech about family sticking together. I smiled, set down my fork and said the sentence that detonated their little plan. You can't move into my place, Jake. I sold my house yesterday. If you've ever had a moment where you had to stand up to family who took you for granted, take a second and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever been the one expected to fix everything just because you're responsible, hit like and subscribe right now so more people who need this story find it. Okay, let me show you exactly how we got to that dinner table and why I chose the nuclear option with a smile. From the outside, our family looked like a brochure for the American middle class. Dad was an accountant at a reputable firm. Mom taught second grade and came home with construction paper crowns and glitter in her hair. We had a backyard full of dandelions and a white fridge covered in A- spelling tests. But inside that house there was a set of rules written in invisible ink. One for me, one for my younger brother. I learned early that you worked, waited, and earned. Jake learned that if you made enough noise, adults bent the world for you. When I was 9, I saved allowance for weeks to buy a purple Walkman at the mall kiosk. Jake, at 6, saw a toy robot on a shelf, wailed like his heart was breaking, and walked out holding it while Mom whispered about his sensitive temperament. That was our pattern. I learned to plan. He learned to expect. By the summer before college, I worked a breakfast shift at a diner, showered in the back room with lemon-scented dish soap, and hustled to an afternoon retail shift to stack up textbook money. Jake, 2 grades behind me, spent his afternoons on the couch, practicing controller combos and telling anyone who'd listen that esports were the future. When September came, my parents hugged me in a cramped dorm room and told me how proud they were of my independence. They chipped in what they could. I took out loans, tutored freshmen, and learned to stretch a bag of rice into 5 dinners. 2 years later, Jake enrolled at my same university with a "we've got this" plan that covered tuition, apartment, and spending money. He lasted 3 semesters. It wasn't grades, he said. Professors had it out for him. Group projects were toxic. The campus wasn't his vibe. He left, and when consequences knocked, my parents opened their wallets again and called it compassion. I graduated with a business degree and zero illusions about what it would take to build a life. I started at a real estate firm answering phones and scheduling showings. I said yes to every unglamorous task, learned contracts by heart, and kept a spreadsheet of every dollar that could be shaved off my expenses. I put part of every commission into a high-yield savings account labeled Dream Home. It wasn't just a house I wanted, it was proof. Proof that doing the right things for a long time eventually adds up to something you can turn a key in. Jake treated jobs like flings. Bartending seemed exciting until he comped half the neighborhood and got fired. A sales role at a cell phone store ended with a mysterious inventory discrepancy no one could explain. He flirted with insurance, but studying for the license was too boring to take seriously. Every exit had an explanation that placed the blame anywhere but in the mirror. My parents' lectures about responsibility floated on top of rent checks, car payments, and wiped clean credit card balances. I kept my mouth shut and my head down. Felt safer that way. At 29, after 8 years of saving in a city where every pretty listing disappears like a magic trick, I walked into a sunlight-struck Craftsman with creaky original floors and a living room bay window that made the morning look kinder. The price was at the ceiling of my budget. The mortgage process interrogated every line of my life. The day the keys hit my palm, I cried in the car exactly long enough to fog the windshield. It wasn't a mansion. It was mine. The housewarming was the one night I let myself be the main character. Mom arranged lilacs. Dad stood in the yard with tongs and a grin. My friends toasted to a decade of slow, stubborn grit. Jake sauntered in 3 hours late, no gift, a story about a girlfriend who wasn't ready for a man with vision, and a not really a question. Could he host a party at my place sometime because his apartment was kind of a shoebox? I smiled and said no. He sent me a week of sulky texts about how money had made me stuck up. It was easier to let them hang there than to point out the real difference between us. The next 2 years were a patchwork of small joys and reminders that century-old charm comes with century-old pipes. I painted every room. I killed my first garden and planted it again. I learned which floorboards squeaked when I tiptoed for coffee before sunrise. The mortgage stretched me, but I made it work. Worth it can be a heavy sentence, but it kept me warm. While I was learning the language of homeownership, Jake was writing the same paragraph over and over in different fonts. New job, big talk, messy exit. New apartment, big plans, eviction warning. Our family dinners became story hours where my parents wrung their hands and explained that the world is hard on creative people. When his car died, they surprised him with a used sedan because how else would he get to job interviews? When he maxed out a credit card, they paid it off and told themselves it was the last time. Last month, his sporting goods assistant manager era ended with the same vague whispers about inventory and jealous coworkers. His landlord declined to renew the lease. Too many noise complaints, too many late payments. I didn't hear it from Jake. I heard it from my mother, who called with a soft voice and a loaded phrase about family pulling together when times are tough. I said the words you say to keep the peace and went back to my spreadsheets and listings. I wish I'd looked closer at the pattern forming around me. The oddities started as pinpricks. My parents, who usually called on Sunday afternoons, began phoning midweek, just to check in. When I asked for specifics, I got "we'll talk in person," and "we have a couple ideas." Jake, who had been blessedly quiet for months, texted to ask what internet speed I paid for, whether my spare room got morning light, and if my neighbors were cool about music at night. When I asked why, he sent a winky face and said, "No reason." A day later, he wanted the measurements of my office. "You think a king would fit?" As if I were a furniture showroom associate and not his sister with a job and a life. That same week, work hit a new gear. I'd landed a demanding client shopping luxury in the Gold Coast. The commissions could change my year, but her wish list mutated daily. Every morning I built a new map of the city's possibilities and ran until the heels of my boots felt like they were on fire. On Tuesday, a drip under my kitchen sink that I'd been meaning to schedule for sometime next week turned into a plumber's grimace and a quote that made my stomach drop. The main line, he said. $7,000 to fix it right. 2 months earlier I'd replaced the water heater. A few weeks before that, an electrician rewired the ancient thicket in the basement. Old houses have souls, yes, and appetites. I don't cry easily about money. Numbers are problems with answers if you catch them early enough. But I sat on the step holding a paper estimate that felt heavier than it should, and did the math I'd been avoiding. I called Sandra, the advisor who had warned me gently years ago that my dream might stretch tight. She asked me to open my laptop, walked me through the spreadsheet, and spoke the truth I needed. I wasn't failing. I was house poor. And if I kept pretending I could juggle everything forever, I'd drop the wrong thing. "Have you considered selling while the market's still hot?" she asked. "You bought at a good moment. Your neighborhood's up. If you sell smart, you could reset. Pay off what's bleeding you, keep an emergency cushion, and buy something realistic later without living with a knot in your chest." The first taste of the idea felt like defeat. This house was proof, remember? But grief isn't a verdict. It's a stage. I called Melissa, a colleague who knows our area cold and doesn't romance houses. She walked through with a critical eye that never once apologized. "List at this number," she said, "and be ready to move fast. I have a couple who just lost a bidding war a few blocks over. They're pre-approved and motivated." The next afternoon, that couple toured while I was at a showing across town. By dinner, they'd offered 5% over ask with one condition: close in 30 days. They'd let me rent back for another 30 while I found the next chapter. It was everything a spreadsheet could hope for and an arrow through my sentimental heart. I signed. The inspection was clean enough. Little things I could fix without bleeding out. And by Wednesday all contingencies were gone. On Thursday I sat in a title office, signed my name enough times to make it look like someone else's, and walked out with a certified check that felt like a life jacket. I didn't tell my family. Partly because the deal could still wobble. Mostly because I needed one thing in my life that wasn't a committee decision. I wanted to hold my own choice quietly for a few days before anyone tried to pry it out of my hands under a banner that said, "Love." Sunday came, the day we gather out of muscle memory. The house smelled like pot roast and garlic mashed potatoes when I walked in at 5 sharp. The good china was out, which we don't do for ordinary meat and potatoes Sundays. A bottle of champagne sweated in an ice bucket, And my dad called me reliable Natalie, with a grin a little too bright. My mother hugged me and told me I looked tired, code for we're worried about you, or perhaps, we're about to tell you something you won't like. I kept things light. Weather. Mom's container garden. A funny client story without any of the sharp edges. But the room hummed with a secret. My parents checked the front window every few minutes. When the door finally swung open 20 minutes late, Jake walked in with a fresh haircut, a tucked-in button-down, and a gift bag he handed to Mom with performative humility. Brought wine, he said, and Mom cooed like a director congratulating her lead. He took the head of the table. Dad slid to the far end. I took a side seat and a slow breath. Dinner tasted like staging. Every comment turned towards space and safety and how big houses feel empty. All that room just for you, my mother said lightly as if she'd just thought of it. Must get lonely, she added, not lightly at all. My father nodded and talked about family sticking together during hard economies. Jake glanced at his phone at intervals like he had a cue to hit. The champagne waited in its bucket, perfectly timed. If you've ever sat through a meal where everyone's already decided your part without asking you, hit like and drop a quick comment with how you handled it. Did you keep your cool or call it out on the spot? Your tips might help someone who's watching this in the car outside a family dinner right now. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this all unfolds, because the next 5 minutes at that table changed everything we thought we knew about helping. We ate pie. Jake stood, reached for the bottle, and made a show of working the foil with the confidence of a man who believes the universe is his stage. Time to share some good news, he announced, and the cork popped like a starter pistol. He poured 4 flutes, one for each of us, lifted his glass and delivered the line he'd been rehearsing in the mirror. To new living arrangements, he said, eyes shining. Starting next Saturday, I'll be moving into Natalie's house. Just for a bit, obviously. Until I get back on my feet. Silence, then 3 faces turning toward me like flowers following light. My parents smiled, the kind of smiles people wear when they've already rolled the credits in their heads. Jake added a helpful detail. The spare bedroom is perfect. And since Nat works all the time, she won't even notice me. I'll help with utilities. Maybe mow the lawn. I looked at the champagne bead around the rim of my flute and felt something inside me click into place. It wasn't rage, rage is hot. This was cool, heavy certainty. The kind that makes your hands steady when you put your fork down, the kind that lets you choose a sentence and trust it will land. My mother leaned forward, nervous brightness slipping. Isn't that a good plan, honey? Dad added the "it's not safe for a young woman to live alone anymore" line like it would make their logic airtight. Jake smirked, because why wouldn't he? Plans had always been made for him, never with him. I reached into my bag and touched the manila envelope, the one with ink still drying from the day before. The room shrank to the size of that table. I could hear the soft tick of the kitchen clock, the distant sportscaster my father had muted earlier, the tiny, hopeful exhale my mother made when she thought I was about to say yes. I lifted my eyes and smiled, the kind of smile you use when you're about to do something kind for yourself and hard for everyone else. And then, rewind with me for a minute, because the bomb I was about to drop only makes sense if you've seen the fuse being lit all week long. On Monday, after the plumber's verdict, I sat with my bank app open and played out scenarios. If I put the $7,000 on a card, I could cover it, but the interest would start chewing before the next paycheck landed. If I raided the tiny emergency fund I'd been rebuilding post-water heater, I'd be one roof leak away from panic. I kept running into the same wall until Sandra's voice cut through, reminding me that sometimes the bravest thing isn't holding on, it's letting go on purpose. On Tuesday, Melissa texted, "The couple loved your place. They want in. Can I send the offer?" I stared at the number. I wrote down my mortgage payoff, the estimates for repairs, closing costs, rent back math, and the cushion I'd have left. On Wednesday, we negotiated inspection items down to a list I could fix without hemorrhaging, and their lender sent a clear-to-close timeline that looked like a solid bridge. On Thursday, I signed, and the title officer slid a check across the desk that represented not just equity, but quiet. The quiet of a reset I'd earned the hard way. I tell you this because a lot of people think the big boundary moments are spontaneous thunderbolts. Sometimes they are. More often they're prepared. They're spreadsheets and phone calls and breathing through the part where you feel like you're betraying your own dream. They're packing the first box even while the house still smells like the coffee you brewed here every morning for 2 years. Friday night, I made lists. Things to keep, things to sell, things to donate. I stood in my living room and ran my hand across the bay window glass and promised myself I wasn't a failure for choosing solvency over aesthetics. Saturday morning, I bought new rolls of tape and a stack of sticky notes. Saturday evening, I set the manila envelope by my purse because I knew if my family backed me into a corner on Sunday, I wouldn't be telling them a theory. I'd be presenting a fact. Which brings us back to the table, the fizzing glasses, the script my family had written without me, and the line I had chosen days earlier. I didn't owe them this level of explanation. Adults don't owe panels of relatives' votes on their lives. But I owed myself honesty. I set my glass down, slid the envelope onto the table, and saw 3 expressions tilt from expectation to confusion in the space of a heartbeat. Before I tell you exactly what I said and how every chair at that table scraped back in shock, make sure you're subscribed and tell me in the comments if you've ever had to make a decision your family hated but your future needed. I'm about to show you how one sentence can stop a lifetime of enabling, without you raising your voice. I slid the manila envelope to the center of the table and let the silence stretch until I could hear the fizzing hiss of all 4 champagne flutes. "There's a snag with your plan," I said evenly. "You can't move into my place, Jake. Because as of yesterday afternoon, it isn't my place anymore." 3 faces froze like someone had hit pause. My mother's hand went to her throat. My father's brows knit as he reached for his glasses. Jake's grin faltered, then collapsed entirely. He laughed first, a thin, disbelieving sound. "You're messing with me." I opened the envelope, slid out the stack, closing disclosure, deed transfer, inspection addendum with my initials marching down the margins, and turned them so they faced my parents. Inspection wrapped Tuesday. Contingencies lifted Wednesday. We signed yesterday at 3. The buyers have a 5-year-old who has already claimed the backyard swing set. I'm renting back for a month, then I'm out. Dad read, lips moving the way they do when accountants trace a column. His face drained a shade. Mom stared at me like she was trying to recognize a stranger in a familiar room. Jake snatched a page, scanned it, and set it down with a slap. "You did this because of me," he said, voice sharpening. "You heard I needed help and sold your house to spite me." "Not everything orbits you," I answered, keeping my tone level. "I sold because the house was bleeding money and the number said it was time. The plumbing quote alone was $7,000. That's on top of the water heater and the electrical. I'm not going to finance home repairs at 20% interest just so you can have a bigger bedroom." "That's not fair," Dad snapped, more out of reflex than conviction. "We've always been there for both of you." I laughed once, not kindly. "Both of us? When I worked 2 jobs for textbooks, I showed grit. When Jake wanted out of consequences, he got a lifeline with a bow. You covered his rent. You bought him a car. When my transmission died, I got a lecture about public transit." Mom flinched. "Your brother's had a tougher time finding his path," she said softly, eyes shining. "He needs different support. And you gave it," I agreed. "So much that he never had to build any of his own." Jake pushed back from the table, chair scraping. "I don't have to sit here and be judged by Miss Perfect," he snapped. "You think you're better because you memorized the mortgage handbook." "I don't think I'm better," I said. "I think I've been responsible. There's a difference. You can be responsible too. It just doesn't start with moving into a house someone else worked for." Dad cut in, voice hard. "Enough. What's done is done. Natalie, can you unwind this? Call your agent. Tell the buyers there's a family emergency." He said the words like the world was a reasonable place that would make room for our habits. They'd understand. "You can eat the earnest money. We'll help with the plumbing. Your brother can stay a few months while he gets stabilized." "Unwinding a sale isn't a shrug," I said. "It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. And even if it weren't, I'm not turning my life into a revolving door because Jake failed to renew a lease he's been violating for months." "I already gave my landlord notice," Jake blurted. Mom spun on him. "You what? We said we'd talk to your sister first." He lifted a shoulder, pretending at bravado. It was obvious. Why waste another month of rent when I could move into the spare room? He looked at me like the outcome had been guaranteed. Like my time, my walls, my quiet, my paycheck existed in service of his plan B. "You made a decision based on access to something that doesn't belong to you," I said. "There's a name for that." His face reddened. "You always do this. You make me feel small and then act surprised when I push back." "No," I said. I stop you from stepping on me and you call it cruelty. Mom reached for that gentle tone she uses on her second graders. Let's breathe. Natalie, sweetheart. What about a compromise? She glanced at Dad. We could cover the repair. Jake could pay utilities, mow the lawn. The sale is final, I repeated. And even if it weren't, I'm not agreeing to any plan where compromise is me absorbing the cost while Jake gets the benefit. Jake stood so fast his chair nearly tipped. Thanks for the support, Nat, really feeling the sisterly love. He stalked toward the foyer, yanked the door open and slammed it hard enough to rattle the good china. Mom started to follow, then stopped at my father's slight shake of the head. He needs to cool down, Dad said, more to himself than to me. We sat there with the echo of that slam thrumming in the bones of the house. Mom cried quietly, the kind of soft, helpless weeping that makes you want to give in just to make it stop. He's going to be homeless. He's a 30-year-old man with options, I said. Rooms for rent exist. Couchsurfing exists. You exist. Dad coughed. Your mother turned his room into her craft space, he admitted. The guest room's full of storage. I stared. So I was the only feasible landing pad because you two didn't want to move boxes. It's not that, Mom protested, then faltered. He needs independence. He needs consequences, I said, softening my tone. He needs to want a future for himself more than you want it for him. The rest of the conversation wandered in circles, a tired choreography we'd been performing for years. Could I put him up in my next place? Float him a few months of rent? Lend from the proceeds? Each suggestion assumed my resources were a public asset. Each took for granted that I'd absorb the fallout so we could preserve the illusion that everything was fine. When nothing changed, I stood, slid the documents back into the envelope and picked up my purse. I love you, I said, meaning it. I'm not available for this dynamic anymore. Dad walked me to the door, the lines around his mouth deeper than when I'd arrived. He pulled me into a hug that surprised both of us. I don't always get it, he murmured. But I'm proud of you. It cracked something in me I hadn't known was brittle. I nodded, left before I cried, and drove home on that quiet stretch of road where the streetlights only catch you every 100 feet. If you've had to draw a hard line with family, share the sentence you used in the comments. It might give someone else the exact wording they need tonight. And if you think more people should hear stories about boundaries that don't turn you into the villain, tap like so the algorithm knows to send this to them. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happened the week after that dinner says a lot about what support should actually look like. The days that followed turned my phone into a chorus with no conductor. Jake texted in bursts. Fury, guilt, bargaining, back to fury. You ruined my plan. You'd rather see me on the street than help. You always think you're better. When I responded, I kept it short, factual. I sold for financial reasons. Your housing choices are yours. I'm not a landlord, a bank, or a parole officer. Mom called with proposals packaged in compromise language. We'll put money toward a new place if you get a 2-bedroom so your brother can stay for 6 months. We'll cover the security deposit if you take a larger unit. I said the same sentence 100 different ways. I'm downsizing on purpose for my sanity. Enlarging my life to accommodate someone else's refusal to plan is just the old pattern with better branding. Extended family arrived like a well-meaning marching band. An aunt called to question my family values. A cousin emailed a heartfelt essay about how his brother stayed with him for a year and it brought them closer. I didn't point out the difference between mutual agreements and unilateral declarations. I didn't explain that I'd already lost sleep to spreadsheets and came to the same conclusion every time. I didn't defend or debate. I packed. The rent back clock gave me 30 days of oxygen. I used it. I found a 1-bedroom conversion with factory windows that caught late afternoon light and concrete floors that couldn't be scratched by a hurried chair. I signed a lease not because it was glamorous but because it was sane. When the sale funds hit the high-yield account I'd opened just for this moment, I paid off the last odds and ends still clinging to my budget like burrs. The relief in my chest was almost unfamiliar. It turns out that breathing without bracing for the next bill is a skill you have to relearn. One afternoon, as I set a deposit receipt on my kitchen counter, a text flashed from Jake. We need to talk. I'm coming by after work. Not a question. Not, is this a good time? I considered telling him no. But I'd rather have one hard conversation than another week of half fights through a screen. I got home and found him on my front steps, the posture of a man who thinks showing up constitutes 90% of effort. Inside, surrounded by labeled boxes and blank patches where art had hung, his bravado sagged a little. "So you're really doing this," he said, not looking at me. "You're selling the altar of your self-righteousness." I gestured at the boxes. "The altar's already in the truck on Saturday." He sat, uninvited but expected. "Mom says I should apologize for how I acted at dinner," he muttered. "So, sorry." He stared at his shoes like the word had been a heavy thing to lift. "Is that what you came to say?" I asked. "Partly," he admitted. "Mostly I came to ask if we could work something out. My landlord is on a warpath. I have to be out at the end of the month. If you can't let me stay here, maybe you could float me first and last and the deposit? I'll pay you back when I get a new job. Promise." Promises have a scent when they've been broken too many times. I could afford it now. I could make the short-term problem evaporate. But I pictured the dozen previous evaporations and how quickly steam turns into fog. "No," I said gently and firmly at once. "I'm not lending you money." He recoiled like I'd slapped him. "Must be nice to sit on a pile and pronounce judgment." "This is not about luck," I said. "It's about choosing a different outcome than the one you circle every year. You don't have to like it. You do have to live it." He stood, anger flaring back to full. "Enjoy your tiny industrial shoebox," he snapped. "I'll be busy not freezing under a bridge." "You won't freeze," I said. "You could ask a friend for a couch. Find a room in a shared house. Go to mom and dad. None of those are impossible. They're just not the fantasy where you wave your hand and a better life appears without your help." He left with a huff that pulled cold air into the room. I sank into the dent his body had left on the couch and let the quiet happen. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like opening a window in winter. Sharp, bracing, necessary. The next morning, a text from my father. "We'll clear the guest room. He can stay here for now. If you're able, could you help move the boxes Saturday?" It was small, but it was seismic. For the first time, my parents weren't rerouting Jake's emergency through me. I said yes to moving boxes because saying yes to that was saying yes to a better pattern. I also sent a group message. "I'm taking a few weeks to focus on moving and settling. Emergencies only. Otherwise, I'll check in later this month." Mom wrote back immediately, hurt and hearts. Dad wrote, "Understood." Jake didn't respond. I put the phone down, taped up a box labeled kitchen. Fragile, and kept going. Moving day arrived at 8 on the dot with a truck that smelled like canvas and dust and a crew that moved like a practice dance. The piece-by-piece unmaking of a life is oddly procedural. Wrap, lift, slide, stack. I wandered through the rooms and said quiet goodbyes in the language of fingers on walls and a hand on a windowsill. The bay window where I'd read on Sundays. The dining table that had hosted my first big deal celebration. The office where I'd hammered out contracts at midnight. The place doesn't hold you back, I reminded myself. Your fantasy of the place does. The buyers arrived for a final walkthrough, beaming with the kind of joy that makes it easier to let go. They pointed where a tiny desk would go for homework, where they'd string lights over the patio. I handed them the keys and to my surprise felt not envy but relief. The next chapter could be the right size. I didn't have to carry a house like a metal and a millstone at the same time. The first week in the new apartment felt strange in the way new shoes feel strange. Tight in the wrong spot until one day you notice they don't rub. The building hummed with the urban chorus. Muffled music, footsteps in the hall, the nightly sigh of someone else's dishwasher. The windows were taller than my last ceilings. Light pooled against the floor in rectangles that moved as the day did. I paid the first month's bills and didn't flinch. After the last check to the last little debt cleared, a feeling I hadn't had in years settled. Margin. Breathing room. The absence of dread is not drama. It is better. Meanwhile, in the suburb where patterns had calcified, things shifted. Mom texted a photo of a handwritten chart on the fridge. House rules. Curfew on weeknights. Rent due on the 1st. Dishes rinsed and in the washer, not in the sink. Jake threw a fit, she admitted later, then realized the rules weren't suggestions. Dad helped him prep a resume that didn't read like a cautionary tale. He has an interview with a downtown marketing firm, Dad told me on the phone, amazement tucked inside his voice. He asked me to practice questions. "We haven't done that since you needed help with your first internship." I smiled into the receiver. "That's good," I said. That's real. Midway through this story, if you're thinking, I've needed to see what happens when boundaries stick, drop a quick boundaries hold in the comments so I know you're with me. And if the slow change in this family gives you a little hope, tap like so this gets to someone who's scared to take their first step. If you're new here, subscribe, because we're about to hit a Sunday dinner that doesn't end in a slammed door. 2 weeks later, I drove back to the house where meat and potato sundaes have been served for decades. I'd braced for iciness. Instead, there was an awkward politeness, like everyone had been issued a new script and hadn't memorized their lines yet. Jake arrived on time in a collared shirt that actually fit his shoulders. He waited until plates were served to clear his throat. I got the job, he said. Entry level. I start Monday. He looked at me and then away. It's not glamorous, but there's room to move up. That's great, I said and meant it. The bits you learned in those marketing classes will help. He nodded once. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement that the ground had shifted under all of us. After the dishes were carried to the sink, Mom tugged me into the hallway with that look she gets when she's about to say something she should have said earlier. I owe you an apology, she said, voice low. Your father and we expected too much of you and too little of him. We thought we were protecting him. We were really just postponing the day he'd need to stand up. It wasn't fair to you. I swallowed around the lump that sentence lodged in my throat. Thank you, I said. That's a lot. She gave a watery smile. It's been an adjustment. He leaves cups everywhere. He doesn't love curfew, but he's trying. And we're learning to be parents to adults, not toddlers. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm replaced the old drumbeat. Mom sent a photo of Jake handing her cash on the first of the month, an amount small enough not to crush him and large enough to remind him that roofs cost money. We're saving it for his security deposit, she texted. He doesn't know. I didn't scold. I didn't say be careful. I sent a thumbs up and a heart because encouragement can be part of a boundary if you let it. At my place, the new normal took shape. A hanging rack by the door with only my coats on it. A tiny herb garden in a planter that wouldn't die if I blinked. Saturday mornings that didn't include trips to home improvement stores because something had failed again. I noticed how much better coffee tastes when you're not drinking it with a side of worry. I noticed how much kinder I am when I'm not stretched like a rubber band to the point of snapping. Choosing a smaller container didn't shrink my life. It gave it edges. A month later, Dad called with the kind of proud softness that used to be reserved for report cards and graduation programs. We posted a list of interview questions on the fridge, he said. He came into the kitchen the next morning with answers typed out. He chuckled. Your mother underlined verbs like she does with her students. I pictured it, Jake rolling his eyes and then doing the work anyway, and felt something unclench. We managed another Sunday meal without theatrics. Jake talked about onboarding and spreadsheets and a boss who actually gave feedback instead of vibes. He didn't gloat. He didn't beg. He chewed, he contributed, he rinsed his plate. We were not a movie family with perfect arcs and orchestral swells. We were people flawed and funny and trying. On the drive back to the city, I let the quiet of my car remind me that breaking a pattern isn't a one-time act, it's a practice. Every time you choose not to pick up someone else's dropped responsibility, you strengthen the muscle that keeps you from hurting yourself to help them. Every time someone you love struggles and you hand them a tool instead of taking the weight, you teach your heart that love can be strong and kind at the same time. A few days later, while I was signing for a delivery at my new place, a small bookshelf that made more sense than my old wall unit, my phone buzzed. It was Mom, marveling that Jake had set his alarm early to iron a shirt. He asked me how to keep the collar from curling, she wrote, clearly delighted to be asked for help that didn't involve a credit card. I showed him the steam trick. I smiled, not because shirts matter, but because asking for practical help is an adult motion. It meant he'd started pivoting from fix this for me to show me how. I'm not going to pretend everything stayed smooth. There were backslides. There was the week he came home at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday and Mom texted me a picture of the chore chart circled in red like a crime scene. There was the afternoon I got 3, what if he moves in with you when your lease is up? Messages from different relatives because group chats are forever. There was the evening Jake called, clearly fishing to see if he could borrow my car, just while it's in the shop. Each time I used the same script. Clear, kind, brief. No, not this time. I'm not available for that. You'll figure it out. At the end of the second month, Dad called to say they'd found a studio near Jake's job that fit his budget. "He's saving," Dad said, a little wonder in it. "He grumbled about bringing lunch 3 days a week, but he's doing it." Mom chimed in from the background. "He made that spinach dip you liked for a potluck at work. People asked for the recipe." I laughed. "Tell him he's officially useful." I could hear the smile in my father's reply. "He'll like that. If you're still with me, take 10 seconds to comment the one boundary you're going to hold this month. Something you know will make future you grateful. It helps you commit, and it helps someone else reading realize they're not the only one trying. And yes, hit like if this is the kind of real-life story you want more of. Subscribe so you don't miss how this ends, because the most surprising conversation of all was still ahead. The one where my mother said the words I never expected to hear, and the one where I realized that selling a house wasn't the end of my dream. It was the beginning of a better one. We hit a new milestone at the next Sunday dinner that mattered more than the champagne announcement that had detonated weeks earlier. After dessert, while Dad packed leftovers into labeled containers, his superpower, Mom pulled me onto the back porch. The evening was soft. She held her mug with both hands. "I've been thinking about the word help," she said. "How often we used it to avoid asking him to do anything hard. We told ourselves it was love. What you did felt cruel to me at first. But it wasn't. It was precise." She took a breath. "I'm sorry, Natalie. For the years you were the safety net because you were easiest to lean on." I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I did nothing except let it sit between us like something warm we could both hold. She went on lighter. "Also, he still leaves his socks in the living room. I may murder him." We laughed until we had to wipe our eyes, which is a much better reason for tears. By the time the leaves turned, the pressure that used to live under my ribs had been replaced by something steadier. Work felt less like a sprint on a treadmill that kept speeding up and more like a run where I could see the mile markers. Without a house devouring my money in unpredictable bites, I saved without drama. I allowed myself to buy a decent chef's knife. I booked a weekend away with friends and didn't do the mental gymnastics of, can I really afford to breathe? I reorganized my goals with a pen instead of panic. Jake signed a lease on a tidy studio with a view of a brick wall and a sliver of sky. He posted a photo of his keys. He didn't tag me begging for a couch or cash. He invited me over after he'd assembled a wobbly table and burned his first attempt at chicken. I brought a plant and a grocery gift card. He shrugged, awkward. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I know I've been a lot." "Family is complicated," I said, which is the truest thing I have learned as an adult. "But we're doing better." And we were. Not perfect. Better. The kind of better that doesn't look like fireworks, just like fewer alarms. The kind of better where phones ring less for crises and more for, "Do you remember the name of the place with the good cannoli?" The kind of better where the person who used to walk into your house like it was his birthright stops at the door and knocks. That's where I'm going to pause this chapter. Because part 3 is where we talk about the purchase I never thought I'd make again, the one that didn't come with shame or showmanship, the one that fit my life like a garment tailored to who I actually am. It's where Jake surprises us all with a message I read twice to make sure it was real. It's where my parents admit something that changes how we meet each other at the table. And it's where I tell you the exact numbers I used to decide what smart looked like after I let go of impressive. If you're ready for that, make sure you're subscribed so you catch the finale the second it drops. And in the comments, tell me the moment in this story where you thought, "That's where I would have walked out," or "That's where I would have stayed and spoken." Your answers will be the map someone else needs. I didn't rush the goodbye to the old life, and I didn't romanticize it either. When the movers pulled away and the echo of big rooms closed behind their taillights, I took the elevator up to my new place with a single box labeled, "Tonight." Inside were a kettle, one mug, clean sheets, and the book I always read when I need reminding that progress is usually quiet. I made tea on a stove that didn't hiss like a tired volcano and sat on the floor under windows taller than I am, listening to the city hum instead of a house groan. The first night I slept on a mattress without a bed frame and woke up lighter, not because anything was glamorous, but because nothing was pretending anymore. 2 weeks later, when the last of the sale funds cleared and my rent-back period ended, I went to see a property I would have dismissed in my dream home or bust era. A modest 2-bedroom townhouse just outside the city grid, with a postage stamp patio and the kind of floor plan that values storage over spectacle. My colleague, different from Melissa who'd handled the sale, joked that it looked like the house version of a reliable friend. He was right. No drama. Decent bones. The kitchen wasn't trying to be a showroom, it was trying to be helpful. The primary bedroom fit a queen bed and a real dresser without Tetris. The second room could be an office or a guest space without becoming a shrine to what's. The HOA fee covered snow removal and a roof fund. The complex had more bikes than luxury SUVs. No one would drive by and whisper, "Wow." They'd say nice and mean sensible. This time I didn't let admiration lead, I let math drive. I wrote guardrails on an index card and put it in my pocket before I toured. Housing all-in, mortgage, taxes, insurance, had to sit at or under 25% of my take-home pay, not the other way around. I needed a 6-month emergency fund that stayed put after closing. If buying wiped it out, the answer was no. I would set aside 1% of the home's value each year for maintenance in a separate savings bucket on autopilot, so a broken valve or a cranky appliance didn't become a credit card emergency. I would refuse any mortgage product I had to hope on. Fixed rate only, no balloons, no adjustable torpedoes hiding in fine print. My total debt to income would have room for error. My retirement contributions would keep flowing at the rate I'd promised myself in my 30s. If any one of those lines broke, the deal broke. I promised numbers. Here they are, because real choices live in specifics. I had sold my Craftsman for 5% over ask. The check I walked away with after paying off the remaining principal, covering closing costs, and eating a little inspection list was just under $87,000. I didn't treat that like winning a game show. I parked it, let my pulse settle, then carved it up with purpose. $20,000 stayed as cash buffer on top of the 3 months I already had. $25,000 went into a short-term treasury ladder, so it was earning while being close enough to count as safety. $32,000 became a down payment target, which meant the purchase price had to sit in a lane where that number equaled 20% or better. Anything that pushed me under 20% would have to be so compellingly under budget elsewhere that PMI wouldn't feel like paying to breathe. If you're a numbers person, that put my shopping window roughly in the low 300s. The townhouse list price was $309. Taxes were sane, insurance quotes didn't make me choke, the HOA was $180 and actually funded. With 20% down, a fixed rate, and today's not great not terrible interest climate, principal and interest would land in the mid-1500s. Add $600-ish for taxes and insurance, plus the HOA, and my all-in would tap the door at around 24% of my net. In my old life, the house ate 35% on a quiet month, 40% on a noisy one. Impressive, cost me the ability to sleep. Smart, made room for a future where I wasn't negotiating with anxiety at the grocery store. I called Sandra to sanity check the plan, not for permission, but because a second pair of eyes catches the potholes your heart pretends not to see. She asked me what the mortgage payment would feel like if my income dipped for 2 months. I told her I'd done that math, that the buffer plus the ladder plus my current pipeline at work made the numbers hold. She asked if I was secretly counting on anyone else to rescue me if I guessed wrong. I told her the truth. No. Then she asked the question that matters more than any spreadsheet. How will you feel when you get the keys? I thought about the bay window in the old house and how much of that joy had been about proving something to everyone who had underestimated me, including me. I thought about these plain white walls and the way relief had settled on my chest like a bird that finally found a branch. Proud, I said. And steady. Then let's get you steady, she said. I didn't announce any of this. I didn't send links to the family group chat. I didn't explain on a call while someone tried to talk me into a bigger place, for future flexibility. I put in an offer at ask with a clean timeline and a pre-approval so tight it hummed. The sellers, a couple relocating for work, wanted exactly that, clean and calm. We signed. The inspection found a bathroom fan that sounded like a helicopter and a GFCI outlet that had retired without telling anyone. The sellers fixed both. I wired the down payment without my heart rate spiking. On closing day, I signed far fewer lines than the last time, grabbed the keys, and stood in a doorway that wasn't trying to make a point. I liked it better for that. The first thing I moved in wasn't furniture. It was a rule. No decisions that mortgage my peace to buy someone else comfort. The second thing was a cheap, decent dining table that would see actual dinners instead of becoming a mail altar. The third was a little ceramic bowl for my keys, because the fastest way to start resenting your life is to make it hard in 1,000 small, stupid ways. I set up automatic transfers. On the first of the month, money slid into the maintenance bucket, into the next property taxes bucket, into the future joy, bucket that was not allowed to get hijacked by guilt. I've learned that willpower cracks. Systems hold. Meanwhile, across town, my parents weren't just saying the right things, they were doing them. They stuck to the fridge rules even when Jake decided they were draconian. Rent arrived in my mother's palm on the 1st. She marched it to a separate account on the same day. Chores rotated, and when he balked, they didn't pick up the slack. Dad sat with him at the kitchen table and ran mock interviews, then circled the S and S in his answers the way he used to circle math mistakes on my 5th grade homework. When Jake sulked, they didn't soothe. They sent him on a walk and started dinner without him. And the thing about not rescuing a person is that sometimes you get to watch them discover they can, in fact, swim. A month after he started, my phone buzzed with a message that didn't read like a ransom note. "First paycheck that doesn't vanish in 24 hours, he wrote. "Feels weird. In a good way." He sent a photo of a receipt from a savings transfer for $200. It's not the amount that made me grin. It's what it represented. The first snowflake in what could become a drift if he kept at it. A week later, he texted a picture of a glass container filled with the boring pasta he'd prepped for lunches. "Can't believe I'm that guy," he wrote. "Turns out food at home is actual food." I replied with a shrug emoji and a "proud of you." It wasn't effusive. It was honest. If this part of the story is hitting you in the gut, the part where you swap impressive for sustainable, where you decide your next home or job or relationship has to be the right size instead of the right brag, drop smart over show in the comments so I know you're here with me. And if a real-life blueprint like this is the kind of thing you want more of in your feed, tap like so this gets in front of someone who's still trying to hold together a life that looks good but feels awful. If you're new, subscribe. We do stories here that tell the truth and hand you sentences you can use. Somewhere between my 3rd Saturday morning at the farmer's market and the first thunderstorm I watched streak across those tall windows, my mother asked if I'd meet her for coffee without the men. She ordered something too sweet and didn't drink half of it, which is what she does when she's nervous. "We should have said this earlier," she began, "before it had to get loud. We thought love was making sure he never crashed. You showed us love is teaching him how to land. I'm sorry we put so much weight on you because you were the easiest shelf to reach." She stared at her cup. "We told ourselves you didn't need us. That wasn't fair. You needed parents who protected your boundaries, not ones who made you choose them in front of everyone." I wanted to say it's okay because that's a reflex I've been trying to retire. I didn't. I said, "Thank you." And then, because I meant it, "I know you were doing your best with the tools you had. I'm glad we're all getting better tools." She laughed wetly, dabbed her eyes, and asked if I'd help her pick a birthday gift for my dad that wasn't socks. We bought him a small, ridiculous kitchen torch because he loves gadgets he'll use twice and then brag about forever. It's a lot easier to be playful with people when you're not wallpapering over a crack big enough to swallow the whole room. At work, steadiness turned into momentum. I stopped chasing every shiny client and focused on the ones who respected a plan. I took a step back from hustle theater and said yes to the kind of projects that compound. When you're not hemorrhaging cash into a house that keeps tapping your shoulder with a new crisis, you can breathe long enough to choose well. There's a myth that smaller means less. Sometimes smaller is the width of the lane where you can run fast without hitting the guardrail. Around the same time, Dad called to say he'd driven Jake to tour a studio near the train. "It's not fancy," he said, "but he can afford it without pretending numbers are feelings." He tried out the line like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be proud yet. "Mom's been putting his rent aside for the deposit," I said gently. "Give him the envelope when he signs. Let him connect the dots." He was quiet a beat. "We were wrong to keep trying to cushion the ground," he said finally. "It made the falls longer." I told him I loved him. Because love is true even when it's wrong for a while. The day Jake signed his lease, he sent a photo of a key on a ring with a tag the property manager had labeled APT3B in neat block letters. "It's tiny," he wrote. "But it's mine." I sent back the address of a thrift store that isn't a heartbreak and the name of a grocery where rotisserie chickens cost less than your dignity. That weekend I brought over a plant that thrives on neglect. He asked if I could help hang a curtain rod. We measured twice. We drilled once. He said, "Thanks," in a way that didn't try to turn gratitude into leverage. A month into the new job, he texted me unsarcastic. "Got a small bonus for hitting my targets," he wrote. "Didn't blow it. Put half toward the emergency fund. Took myself out for a burger with the rest. Feels different." Then another message before I could reply. Sounds dumb, but thanks for not letting me move in. If you had, I wouldn't have done any of this. I sat on my couch and let that sentence be what it was. The beginning of an adult talking to me like another adult. Proud of the choices, I wrote back. Keep going. As for the townhouse, I swore I wouldn't buy again until I knew how not to turn a home into a performance. It turned out to be exactly the right next step. I hosted friends at a table that didn't groan under the weight of proving anything. My office faced a tree that looked ridiculous in the wind. On Zoom, my clients would watch its leaves flutter and unconsciously relax. I bought a toolbox that was sensible instead of aspirational. I learned the names of 3 neighbors' dogs and the one neighbor who knows how to fix a stuck disposal with a broom handle. I planted herbs in the patio planters and didn't kill them. Mostly. I kept my numbers honest. All in, housing stayed where it was supposed to. The maintenance bucket ticked forward no matter how perfect the month looked. I adjusted my retirement contributions upward by 1% the first time I got a raise without sweating. I kept a running list titled Worth It and another titled Noise, and made sure the Worth It list didn't have more than 5 non-essentials on it at a time. The old me would have called that boring. The current me calls it capacity. There were still tests. Jake called one evening to ask if he could borrow my car while his was in the shop, just for 2 days. I told him no, and I told him why. Borrowing would help him avoid solving the actual problem, planning for contingencies. He didn't love it. He found a coworker willing to carpool for gas money and an early coffee. 2 weeks later, he texted that he'd started a car crap sinking fund so the next repair didn't derail him. I sent the little confetti emoji. He answered with the eye roll one because we're siblings and that's the law. We didn't become some internet version of healed. We became ordinary in the best way. Holidays where conversation doesn't require a referee. Sundays where we talk about recipes and weather instead of rescues. A family group text that contains as many photos of badly lit dinners as it does passive-aggressive puzzles. I'll take that trade every time. 6 months after I sold the Craftsman, I stood in the doorway of another property with my realtor friend. A place that looked too practical to be a fantasy but lined up with the guardrails so exactly it felt like a nod from the universe. 2 bedrooms. Newer systems. A tiny private patch of dirt in back that would be a garden when I decided it was. Sun came in at the right angle in the morning. It was priced without hubris. I could put 30% down without touching the emergency fund. The all-in landed under 23% of take-home. My savings rate for retirement could tick to 15 with room to breathe. What do you think? He asked. I looked around and, for once, didn't imagine hosting parties to impress ghosts. I pictured making coffee in socks on a Tuesday and not resenting a single cabinet. I think I've finally learned the difference between a house that flatters you and a home that fits you, I said. Let's write it. I won't bore you with the closing details because at a certain point all the pens and signatures blur. What matters is this. I made a decision that my 22-year-old self would have mocked and my 29-year-old self would have been afraid to see. I did it because of math, because of boundaries, and because of love that grew up. Jake came over on my second weekend there with a wobbly stool he'd sanded and stained himself. Don't put anything heavy on it, he warned. It's mostly for show. But I made it. He set it in the corner of the kitchen and leaned a hip against the counter. New place suits you, he said. He didn't say, I could live here. He didn't joke about a spare key. He asked if I had a level for the frame he wanted to hang. I handed him one. He hung it straight. Before he left, he paused with his hand on the doorknob. Hey, he said like he'd forgotten something that mattered. Dad told me you keep a list called Worth It. What's on it right now? I laughed. The good olive oil, I said. The nice sheets. A weekend with friends. And forgiving myself fast when I miss a perfect day. He nodded. Cool, he said, which is Jake for that landed. Here are the exact phrases that kept me sane when the old patterns tried to sneak back in. Because I promise sentences you could use and I keep my promises. When someone asked for what I couldn't give, that doesn't work for me. When guilt knocked, dressed as an emergency, I'm not available for that. When love tried to dress up as rescue, I trust you to figure this out. When I needed to remind myself I wasn't abandoning anyone, I'm choosing my responsibilities, not everyone else's feelings. They're simple. They're steel. This is the part where I remind you, because someone needs to hear it tonight, that selling the dream version of your life to buy the sustainable version isn't failure. It's fidelity to the person you have to live with for the rest of your days. Sometimes the bravest look isn't the one in the big house's bay window. It's the one in a perfectly average kitchen where you can breathe and pay your bills and laugh at nothing in particular, with people who have learned, slowly and then all at once, to respect the space you hold. If you've made it this far, tell me one guardrail you're going to add to your life this month. Drop it in the comments so someone else scrolling at midnight sees a blueprint they can borrow. If this story gave you a sentence you can use or a number you can trust, tap like so it travels. And subscribe if you want more true stories about boundaries that hold, homes that fit, and families that learn to love like grown-ups. Share this with someone who's standing in a doorway, torn between what looks good and what will actually let them rest. May your next key open a place that's exactly your size.